far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the 100 ABC Women Fireside Chats. Today, we're going to be talking about difficult conversations, but difficult conversations as problem-solving opportunities using compassion, patience, and courage. How can we problem solve, although the conversations may be difficult? How can we agree to disagree without being disagreeable? And today we have some wonderful panelists who are going to share their wisdom with us in this regard. Monte Malepo is the principal of Monte Malepo Consulting. She has over 15 years experience working with organizations to advance diversity, equality, and inclusion. Next, we have Tayonda Kerr. She has an undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Windsor, and she began her career in the gaming industry in 1994. And for the past 4 years, she's dedicated her career to social responsibility at the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. And she's been a leader for over 2 decades and is proud to continuously provide safe spaces for all within corporate Canada. And last but not least, Jenny Okonkwo. She is a certified professional accountant. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. She's the founder of Black Female Accountants Network, and she's passionate about helping women reach their full potential so that they can create a life of impact. Welcome to all of you to this conversation. I've really been looking forward to it. I know it's going to be great. First, I'd like for you to quote unquote quickly fill in some blanks in your biography that might inform this conversation. I'm going to start with Monte because yours was the shortest bio I read. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to be with everyone. I have a consulting company called Monte Malepo Consulting, and we work with boards and senior leaders to advance organizational DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion. I think if I say the word DEI, the first thing that comes to mind is the workforce, employees, and HR. And I really encourage my clients to think beyond just DEI being an employee issue, an HR issue, but that it has to be foundational to everything that your organization does, whether it's procuring goods and services, whether it's board governance, how we communicate and engage with stakeholders. And so I have a DEI Governance Academy where we provide education, training, and coaching to senior leaders and board members.
Mm-hmm. In the community, I happen to know you quite well. I know you've done a lot of volunteer work with regard to advocacy. Your background is in law. You're a trained lawyer, but you're one of the founders of Parents for Diversity.
Yes. So I formed with my friends, some friends of mine years ago, because our kids were experiencing various forms of anti-Black racism in school. And it was really challenging. We're talking about having, difficult conversations, approaching the administration to address my concerns as a parent. And, often the response was, well, we have a zero tolerance approach, but really what does that mean? Because it wasn't in any way preserving my child's dignity and their ability to have an education free from discrimination. And so we met with Black parents across Ottawa and realized that many of them were facing very similar challenges and didn't know how to navigate the school system. So we formed this nonprofit organization to help parents and to work with educators and school boards to advance and to achieve equitable and inclusive education for all students, irrespective of their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity, their disability. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And we're going to come back and talk about the difficult conversations around advocating for your child, for example. Tayonda, tell us a little bit more about your background.
Oh, Sarah, you're too kind. So as I mentioned, I work for the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, and I've been there. This year will be 25 years. So I grew up in OLG because I started when I was 2. But I have had just differing leadership roles within the organization. And so difficult conversations is obviously something, it's that you navigate as a leader going through just in a workspace. But, over the years, I came to, I actually fell into EDI. So I say EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, because I find DEI sounds so close to die, and I just didn't like it. So I always put the equity first. And I always think you have to start with equity first. And so I got into EDI, sort of fell into it. A mentor of mine asked if I would be a part of, one of the first committees at OLG. And so that was back in 2014. And then I just continued doing the work. And then I have then since then brought it into the business of gaming under social responsibility, because I think, just to Monte's point, it is not an HR accountability, which is where EDI sat. We need to bring it back and embed it into the systems and in the way we work. And so moving into my new role, which is Director of Program Development and Delivery under social responsibility, it helps me deliver programs with an equity lens, because I am in the gambling industry. Need to do that in a more equitable fashion. Thank you for the opportunity to say a little bit more about myself, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. And last but not least, Jenny.
Thank you, Sarah. So first of all, thanks to 100 ABC Women for this opportunity to join this very illustrious panel. So feel honored to be part of the conversation today. So for those of you who don't know me, my background is I'm a CPA, a Chartered Professional Accountant, actually came to Canada as a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants that is headquartered in the UK. And subsequently got my Canadian CPA designation and worked in finance and accounting sectors for a number of years. And so my journey into the EDI space is somewhat, I would say, unconventional in a sense, where it actually really emerged as an unforeseen opportunity through professional volunteering. So if somebody had said to me, 10, 15 years ago that you were going to leave mainstream finance and accounting and move into this space, I'd have laughed. I'd have laughed all the way to the end of the week, because I wouldn't have been able to see how that would have happened in the pathway. And so in 2016, having founded Black Female Accountants Network, which is a national and international network, we have members all over Canada. It's award-winning in its own right for the incredible work that it does through collaborative leadership and very dedicated teams. An opportunity just presented itself through someone literally tapping me proverbially on the shoulder at an event a few years ago, saying, I've been following the work that you all are doing at the network. You do realize it's DEI. And of course I didn't, because I was very much in mainstream CPA work at that time. And so the lens that had been used to create the network had been more about empowering our women in the profession, and really looking at it through a community enrichment empowerment lens. And so what I was offered was, would you come and do what you're doing as a volunteer and do it and get paid? And so that's how I come to be in this space. So again, just one of those unforeseen twists and turns that we all have in the journey of life. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So let's get right into it. Difficult conversations is very, very vast. So I do encourage you can put in examples wherever you feel that might help us understand better. Monte, what kind of values should we bring into a difficult conversation? And what for you is a difficult conversation? Why would a conversation be difficult?
Such a good question. Conversations are often difficult. So I'll speak really, because there's so many different difficult conversations, from ranging with, talking to your child about the importance of eating vegetables when they don't like eating vegetables, to what I do in my everyday work is I work with senior leaders and board members on how to talk about things like topics and issues like race and racism, which are very divisive. And with increasing hate in our society, that's another divisive issue. And so those are conversations often, and I work with leaders to help navigate how to respond in the moment and how to navigate these challenging conversations, especially when somebody is called in and out, or when somebody expresses something racist or hateful without even being aware of the impact and how harmful it is. And so in those situations, I think it's really important that people understand that one, it's not about, and I'll talk about the concept of having conversations around race and racism. It's not about this good, bad binary. And I think that's where it becomes really challenging is we think about if somebody says, oh, you know, what you've just said is racist, it makes people very defensive because they feel like it's an attack on their character and not who they are. And I really try to, and sorry, it's attack on their character without really thinking about it's not about who they are. And so I really work with leaders to understand how to invite reflection through through humility, through curiosity, empathy, and compassion. And humility and curiosity are very important in these conversations. Again, with respect to talking about race and racism, many leaders tend to be white, and they belong to dominant social identities. And in doing so, they may not understand the lived experiences of Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people navigating racism. And so they may not understand when somebody says, you know, that comment that you often say to me as a Black woman, oh, Mante, you're very articulate, why that can be harmful, why it's a microaggression. And so that curiosity is necessary, I think, to help bring in an awareness that you may be missing. I'm not aware how Mante navigates the everyday world as a Black woman. So I'm going to be curious in this conversation. And humility is when I always say, and I quote this from another author, I think is Robin DiAngelo, who says, hold your opinions lightly and with humility. And I think that's really critical in these conversations. And then empathy and curiosity, I think compassion go together. And they are values that help us emotionally understand and put ourselves in the position of the person who is experiencing harm, and how they can, how we can understand their situation, even though we're not in their shoes. I think those, if that makes sense, I think those are really the values.
It does. That's excellent. I'm going to write down that humility, curiosity, empathy,
and compassion.
Right, there you go. Tionda, you actually have a psychology degree. So can you talk about the role that emotional intelligence, for example, might play along with those values?
Oh, 100%, Sarah. You know, you and I talked earlier, you have to know yourself, right? And that emotional intelligence is a good bar. Like anybody should go online and take the test, and to see where they sit. And I think when you understand how you are going to be approaching a situation, how you understand what the connection is with the other person, because it's about emotional intelligence isn't always about self-awareness. Yes, it's a big part of it, but it's also understanding the next person. And I think that helps within difficult conversations, as well as knowing who we are in terms of values. And it's funny that Mante had said humility, curiosity, compassion, and empathy, because I tell people all the time, it's be courageous and be kind. And I think when you come from that place of kindness, which will encompass the compassion and empathy, and you are courageous, and that's where the curiosity comes in, you tend to find out more about the situation, and you try to get to that solution in a way that doesn't harm the other person. So I think when you look back on presenting, like using your EI to not only understand what the other person is trying to get in that conversation, or what the point you're trying to make, I think understanding how that person may react to what you're saying so that it doesn't become a divisive conversation is key. And so emotional intelligence plays a very, very big role, not only in understanding who you are, but understanding the situation and understanding how the person may react to the situation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Very well. And Jenny, would you like to weigh in on values, emotional intelligence, and how that informs your approach to a difficult conversation?
Yes, sure. So the interesting thing about values is that they're so personal, and they're so in tune with who each of our is unique human beings. So the first thing I would add to everything that has already been said is we have to sort of be mindful not to try and impose our value set or our belief system on others. And that can be that is not as easy as it sounds, because particularly as professionals, we all have a set of expectations, and sometimes that can sort of trickle into what we expect from others. And the reason why it's keen, in my view, it's really key to bear that in mind, is again, just based on some of what's already been touched upon, every single person has a different lived experience journey. Every single person has been raised in a different way. Even people with this in the same community have not had identical upbringings. And so all of what surrounds you as a human being really frames your values. And so I think what I will add to already what has been said, which has been excellent, is almost sort of like set limits, set boundaries to say, when you're coming into this conversation and you're hearing something that's so contrary to your own value set, I think in the moment, you almost have to make a decision to say, what is my depth of relationship with this person? Is there a power dynamic, a power imbalance? Because all of those types of questions you ask yourself will then help you to understand, what role do I play in this? Do I take time to educate? Do I take time to try and maybe move their thinking? So with difficult conversations being so multifaceted, I think there's occasions where in the moment we have to do some quick calculations. And sometimes it's the case where not all courageous or difficult or brave conversations, because depending, who you're talking to, there's a different label. Not all of them have a unanimous come together moment at the end. Sometimes it's okay, we have to agree to disagree and respect our individual, value set. So that's what I would say.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Monte, so now we're into the, how you prepare yourself for a difficult conversation. And in this round of questions, I'd like as many examples as possible of, how to successfully sort of mentally prepare yourself.
Oh, well, it's so hard because there's so many variables at play, right?
Mhm.
So you'll have in the work I do, I talk about, what happens when you're in the moment, right? And somebody says something harmful, and you're either called out or you're called in, or if you're the target or if you're a witness, how do you call out or call in? And I think it's really important to sorry, your question is how to respond
No,
in the
how do you prepare
how do
yourself
you
for
prepare, right?
difficult
So,
conversations?
right. So when it's in the moment, it's hard to prepare, right? Because it's happening right then and there. So one of the most important things I try to do is practice mindfulness, mindful listening. We don't often talk about that. And that's really because I think for all of us, it's very, very natural for us to become defensive in challenging conversations, in difficult conversations. And so we may become defensive and our emotions may become high, right? And so it's important in those moments, I find, to ground myself. And so I start to do some deep breathing, feel the weight of if I'm sitting, feel the weight of my body on the chair, and just validate the emotions that I'm going through right now, whether it's anger or frustration, or I'm so ashamed of what I may have just said, or whatever range of emotion. So I think when you're in the moment, I think that concept of mindful listening can help prepare you by just grounding yourself so you can start to engage in the dialogue. If you have some time to prepare for the conversation, you heard something in a meeting and you want to talk about it later, putting together your thoughts, making sure that you're in a position to engage is really important. So again, that mindfulness becomes critical, but also understanding things like power dynamics in that relationship. So if you're in a workplace environment or you're on a board and, you may be new to the board or you may be racialized, there's so many different, factors, the relationship that you have with the person. These are all things that you can be thinking about as you prepare to have that conversation. And it's not easy, but I think it's one of the most critical things to do in preparing for that conversation is to be in an emotionally ready state to have to enter into it, if that makes sense.
Emotional readiness. Yes. Emotional intelligence, emotional readiness. And Tayonda, you and I were talking about a very difficult conversation we often don't want to have with elderly parents, or elderly relatives who, we have to talk to them about change on many different levels. How do you prepare?
Yeah, listen, that question touches my heart because my father sadly suffered a heart attack in November. And there was a lot of hard conversation to be had, not only on, his health, which funny enough, my father is the most healthiest 76-year-olds I've ever seen. He's quite healthy. But I think that facing your morality makes the discussion very difficult and just in the concept of it. And on top of which, difficult conversations with family brings in emotions that you won't necessarily have at work because you prioritize family more. And I think that for me, in preparation for that conversation with my dad, I just wanted to for me, it was getting to the objective. And it was an objective on a day-to-day basis. So for example, the very first conversation with him was getting him the surgery that he needed immediately. And I'm very action oriented. I'm a doer, people call me. So I'm the person that made sure his surgery was taken care of. My brothers were all there. My mother was there, but that decision seemed to have been easier for me than than my mother, who was so closely involved with it. And so, once that big piece was taken care of, it was just step by step. And I think when you change your mindset to not look too far into the future and deal with what's happening right then and now, it helps curb the anxiety and the nervousness that you get thinking that, oh my gosh, my parent could die and what would be the next step. And so I think a part of how I dealt with it was looking at that present moment right there and now and what was in front of me first. And I think that generally works well with everyone. Cut down the problem step by step so that you know that you can conquer it one piece at a time. Because when it becomes too big, when that mountain becomes too tall, you give up before you can even give give yourself the opportunity to take it one step at a time. So I think the advice when we're dealing with family, especially, and then yes, that elderly parents, because they can be stubborn. You can't changing minds are hard. I think it's just one issue at a time. So I dealt with my father's health, then I dealt with his recovery, and then now we're in the conversation is how do we prepare? Let's get rid of some of your stuff. Let's minimalize. Let's get you to a point where you are so much more comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that it's been working. I mean, it's only month 3 since his heart attack, but it's been going fairly well. And I do have to say that our relationship has gotten much, much closer because of it. Conquering
That's wonderful to hear because that's not always the case. And I saw in the chat that somebody was mentioning, and this I'm going to be asking Jenny something similar, especially of this family situation. We share the African heritage, so discussing end of life care, wishes, etc., with parents can be quite challenging. What are your thoughts on that difficult conversation?
Yeah, so, as we were, chatting earlier, Sarah, it's, these things are cultural, deeply rooted in certain cultural norms and behaviors, and certain subjects are just, off the table subjects. And what I think what is fascinating to me, I don't have the magic answer to how to make that conversation easier to navigate. What I would say is what is very apparent to me as somebody who is born in the African diaspora is the difference in terms of when an elderly relative, parent, or a loved one has passed, and how the whole process unfolds. And so it is very, very much a celebration of life. It's a big, vibrant affair, which, when you're born in the diaspora and you're watching people, the events around people that have passed, say in a movie, it's very different. It's a very, what you see in the movies is a very somber affair, a very muted affair. And so for me, that's always a very interesting sort of cultural dichotomy, as someone who essentially sits in two cultures. So all of that to say is, it's the lead into a celebration. So the challenge that we have is, how do we just lead into that celebration successfully? How do we navigate those steps? And I think it will be different for each family. It's that there's no magic answer.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Jenny. So we've been talking as if, like, from the point of view of the person who initiates difficult conversation. What if you're on the receiving end of these difficult conversations? How do you navigate it so that it's productive as someone on the receiving end? Monte, would you like to start us off?
It really depends. Again, I always say when I talk about these issues, is there are many variables. Again, the relationship that you have with the person, the power dynamics, that will always inform how you respond. And I think a big part of it is, again, the mindfulness. I find that really grounds me and embodying those values, but holding myself. And I saw that in the chat box about accountability. If somebody says something, or calls me out or calls me in about a comment that I made that was problematic, I'm just, because this is the work that I do in the realm of race and racism, and it was harmful, as much as in that moment I may become defensive or want to be reactionary, because I find that's very normal for people in terms of reacting, is how do I bring myself back and put myself in a position where I'm actually engaging? And the best way to engage in a dialogue is to hear and to listen, to understand the messaging that's being communicated to me. I may not agree with what that person is sharing, and I may not also understand, but I'm going to take the time to listen, because one thing is certain, is that their emotions, whatever they're experiencing emotionally, is very valid. And so even if I may not agree with them, I can validate their emotion. And I can, again, through practicing those values of compassion, empathy, humility, and curiosity, invite that conversation to take place and be reflective. And sometimes the hard thing to do, and what can be very restorative, is to say, I'm sorry, if you've caused harm. Oftentimes as human beings, we may say something innocently, but we may not be aware of the impact, right? So I can say something, if somebody's saying something to me about I did something harmful, I can respond by going, oh, sorry, it was just a joke. So my intention was to, make a joke, but the impact was that I actually offended somebody. I hurt them. And so let's focus on the impact of those words and actions on the person we're communicating with. I also think that sometimes acknowledging, I didn't realize, or I don't know, again, through that humility, can really go a long way in restoring and sustaining that really difficult conversation, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Thank you very much for that, Monte. Tayonda, is there a way to sort of set ground rules and, sort of when somebody initiates a difficult conversation with you, how do you go about that?
So it's from the receiver's perspective or from
Yes.
yeah. So I listen, if the conversation is going to be difficult, I think that both people have a role to play in that. And I think, yes, setting ground rules is a very good habit to have. So I get, from my point of view as a leader, I always go into the conversation saying, just calling what it is, very transparent. I said, I have something difficult to talk to you about, and is now a good time? I always prepare ahead of time. And I think the same goes for the receiver. Once you realize you've been pulled into a conversation that you can see is going to be hard, either on both parties or at least on yourself, you can say to yourself as well, I wasn't prepared to have this conversation right now. Can we reschedule at a time when I am more ABC, whether that be emotionally ready or have more information to prepare myself for what the topic is, what we're going to discuss? Because it's to everybody's point that's been bringing up this power dynamic, that if you're trying to solve a problem through a difficult conversation, you should both be on the same level. You should be all have the same tools ready to address your point of view, to make that a very fruitful conversation where something can come out of it that can help both parties. So I do think that both parties need to be prepared, need to know what they're going into it with. It's kind of like when it's performance review time, right? They put their notes, everybody knows it's coming up. The conversation you're going to have with your boss. You be prepared with your answers, they're prepared with theirs, and you come to a mutual understanding. So I do think that both parties play a very big role in how that conversation is going to come out. And so, yes, 100%, you should be preparing, you should be setting ground rules. If it gets emotional, we will take a break and step back. This is the time allotted. If we go overtime, we'll rebook more time. Let's agree on the space, private area, confidential conversation. I know for me, if we take it out of the work aspect, my most difficult conversation is with my partner. And because you love them so much, right? You love them, and it is so much at stake. And so I have ground rules. I want to talk to you about something. I don't need you to respond. I just need to say my part. We can come back together to have a fulsome conversation because it's so emotional, right? So yeah, setting ground rules is key for both parties. 100%.
Love
Good
it.
question, Sarah.
Love
Can
it.
I
Love it.
add too? That was
Yes,
really
Monte.
that. One of the things I work with leaders is if you're an organizational leader and you know that you are going to have these conversations, is come up with a community agreement. If you lead a team or a board, is that when we have these difficult conversations, let's bring in some kind of, I wouldn't say ground rules because they're not supposed to be rigid, but just some kinds of terms of engagement that'll guide the conversation. Glenn A. Singleton, excuse me, wrote a book. He came up with these 4 agreements of courageous conversation: stay engaged, expect to experience discomfort, speak your truth, and expect and accept non-closure. And I think those are really great if you don't want to come up with your own. But I often find that when our groups, our leaders and their teams come up with their own community agreement and everyone kind of puts their perspective into it and then they agree to it, then when they're in that hard conversation, they can turn to that guiding document to help navigate that conversation.
Can you repeat the author's, I think it was 4. Yeah.
Glenn E. Singleton, I can put it in the chat box, but it's
Could you? Yes.
He's amazing. It's the 4 agreements of courageous conversations.
4 agreements of courageous conversations. I need a poster or something with that.
I have that book somewhere. Now I'm going to go grab it. I forgot all
Right?
about that book. That's a good reminder always.
Yes. So, Jenny, can we talk about what is it? Boundaries. Setting
Yes.
boundaries.
But in what respect, Sarah?
No, I mean, we've got ground rules, but then, okay, setting boundaries, you yourself as on the receiving end of whatever that
Right.
conversation is, what you will and will not accept, and how you communicate that within that difficult conversation.
Yeah, so I think in terms of boundaries, I think the first thing for me would be making sure that it doesn't become personal. And so we're focusing on the issue and not the person, because there's a way that you can give that feedback or, relay those comments in a way that it feels like an attack on somebody's personal character. So I think the number one boundary for me is to try and keep the conversation as depersonalized as possible. And what I find are some good techniques to do that is to take a data-driven approach. So either you have examples of whatever has occurred that has created that situation that you're having to have the difficult conversation about. Maybe you have also got feedback from third parties, be that colleagues in the workplace or be that, you know, other kids in the school where your kid is also in the school. You know, those concrete examples that focus on the actions or be that verbal or non-verbal, I think is absolutely key. I think once that difficult conversation descends into sort of a personal attack, a couple of things happen. First of all, I think credibility can be lost. And secondly, the person who feels under attack will disengage. And so, you know, to really keep the conversation on even keel, you know, keep it about the issue. And then the other key thing is keep it focused. You know, we've all had experiences of those difficult conversations that then say, oh, and by the way, and while we're on this topic, you know, there's this and this and this. And what that does, again, is cause the person on the receiving end to disengage because they're not interested in going on a history lesson or an archaeological dig. And back to what was mentioned earlier, you want to really be tackling one topic or one incident at a time, because as human beings, we want to be really vested in coming up ideally with a solution or a redress for that particular issue. When we then broaden it, well, again, to what's already been said, the person on the receiving end hasn't come in necessarily prepared to address all those other ancillary things that are being mentioned. So I think, you know, those are kind of two main ways that I see as boundaries. Keep it depersonalized and stick to the issue at hand. Don't expand the topic into lots of other different things.
And that happens often in relationships, right?
Yes.
This past trauma, you always like to bring it up in personal relationships. So it's like obviously that conflict still needs to be resolved, but don't bring it into this present conflict. So
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. Somebody asked the question, how do you work with overpowering personalities, especially when they bring forward that difficult conversation publicly?
Oh my
Monty?
goodness. That question's crazy. Sorry, go Monty.
So, I don't know what they mean by publicly. If they mean like publicly in society, you know, because we see a lot of that on social media where people are called out very, very publicly, and then it leads to this cancel culture where people just shut down. And that I find is one of the most toxic ways and fastest ways to end a conversation and to hold back progress. I think that we need to give space to people to make mistakes. It's hard. I have a very A-type personality, so I can relate to being in an overpowering conversation if I'm not somebody who will lean back and be quiet. I'm not a wallflower. So what I can say in those conversations, again, there are many variables, and I think power dynamics is a big one. If you are the only racialized or Black woman in the boardroom, you have to navigate these with a tremendous amount of be very careful, right? And so overpowering personalities can look very differently for many of us, right? And I think it's important to always, I think to Jenny's point, is to really focus on the issues. I loved what you said, don't detract, but also use an evidence-based approach. So if we're talking about issues, and we can reference data to make it objective and not personalize it. I'm basically re-articulating what you've just said, but I find that really helpful. and to not let that energy that person's demonstrating, don't internalize what they are. I find that as somebody who's also sensitive, to not be defined by the response on the other side of the table, to hold my ground and to bring it back to what is it, who am I as an individual, and what am I trying to achieve here? So however reactionary the person you're communicating with may be, I think that you can always choose to ground yourself in that moment, remember your values, remember who you are, and then everything that Jenny said about, you know, how you can make this very objective and not personalize it.
And that's the lawyer speaking, and Jenny, the CPA speaking, data-driven and evidence-based. But Tianda, you wanted to jump in there.
I was going to say a lot of the overpoweredness I see is in privilege sometimes, right? And I do, like in our office, when, you know, there's always that person that wants to be talking above the rest and everything else. I kind of smile and sit back. But I love how Monte put it, because, you know, if you're in a situation where you're going to experience more harm, I don't want to have to tell you to just, you know, say something in that situation. I would, in that situation, if that were me and my personality, if someone's like, it's a calling out situation in front of people, I walk away, because I'm not, my emotions will get the better of me. So I'll walk away and then find a private moment to address it with that person. And again, it depends on the severity of the situation. But I don't, there's a lot of these dominant personalities, and getting your voice to be heard in situations like that can be so difficult. And sometimes there's so much posturing happening in the office, because there's so much, you know, everybody's trying to get up a ladder. I'm tired now. I don't like to fight the ladder. I'm pulling other people up now. So for my particular situation, I will walk away and then address it on my own. And 9 times out of 10, when they're not in front of that group of people, it's like, I'm so sorry, that's not what I intended. So it's just a bit of posturing. So I never face a situation head on. So I just kind of wanted, just because I've seen that happen more recently than not. So just wanted to throw that in. Thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity to say that.
Thanks for that. Somebody is asking this question, which may have already somewhat been answered. Difficult conversations cannot be avoided, but how can we create space for respectful candor? Okay, not attacking, respectful candor that may come across as negative to the person on the receiving end, but it's really meant to be constructive and productive. How do we create these spaces? Jenny?
Yeah, so again, to Tionda's point, just going back to that a little bit as a lead-in, I'm in total alignment with her approach. That's exactly the sort of approach that I use, because my personality is such that, because I'm not a particularly spontaneous person, my immediate answer on impulse is likely not to be my best answer or my best response. I'm somebody who has to go away, gather my thoughts, evaluate what was said, think about who said it, think about the power dynamic, think about what I know about this person. Like, I literally have to go through this checklist to then decide, do I, because there's a number of options with all these things. One of them could be to just let it go. No harm at all in doing that. Doesn't mean you're weak, doesn't mean that you've let them get away with it. Sometimes that is a strategy. I want to make that clear on this call. That is a totally valid strategy. You know, or, you know, you decide you are going to take it up with them. And I would do exactly what Tionda would do. I would, even though it's been a public calling in or calling out, because again, it's about value systems, right? You know, just because somebody else has done that, it may not befit you or fit who you are as a person to also do that, right? It's about values alignment with yourself. And so, you know, that would be a private thing. Now, in terms of safe space for respectful candor, that's actually what I'm leaning to. So to me, if something has happened, you know, publicly, but I choose to deal with it on a one-to-one, I have taken that decision proactively to create that safe space for respectful candor. And, you know, it's different for different people, but that is my own that is my own signature in terms of how I handle difficult conversations. And I think a lot of what Mante said was very true, because, you know, for a lot of us as professional women from underrepresented groups, Black and other underrepresented groups, you know, we may not necessarily have that flanking that, you know, would be you know, that would be present for you to maybe react publicly. You know, you know, that flanking may not be there. And so choosing to address it on a one-to-one does create that space for respectful candor. And, you know, I know with myself, you know, I use phrases like, this is by no means judgment. This is me expressing how it made me feel in the moment. You know, like I use that type of language to lead in, because again, I don't want to personalize the conversation. I don't want it to be about the person or their character. I want it to be about what was either said or done and how it made me feel. So that again is something that's a technique that I use.
Yeah, speaking of techniques, you talked about language. I'm a linguist, so I'm very interested in language. Monte, what kind of phraseology or, you know, should you be using when you are broaching a difficult conversation, where you're the one initiating it? Jenny already started us off.
Can you clarify like what I should be doing when I'm initiating the conversation?
The language, like what kinds of things should you be saying to open the conversation? And what kind of things should you not be saying when you
Yeah,
want to open up a difficult conversation?
I think it's, again, if it's somebody that I have a good relationship with, and you know, this is a big one. I think one of the things that will enable conversations and real dialogue to begin and to be sustained is the trust that exists between the communicators. If there's no trust and psychological safety, I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's possible to have meaningful and sincere dialogue. So I think the trust is a huge factor. I think it's making it personable and talking about how it impacted you. Again, not making it about the other person and who they are and attacking their character, but how it impacted you. And that makes it, because again, one's emotions always are valid, right? Like, so I think it's important approaching it like that. I just wanted to say, there's this really great quote. I don't know if anyone knows Ella F. Washington. She writes for Harvard Business Review, and she's written a lot of amazing work. And she talks about, because it's helped me navigate these conversations. She said, let protecting your joy be your biggest act of resistance. In conversations where, you know, and I get Tianda, your point about feeling that exhaustion of climbing the ladder. Like, I get that. And I think many of us can resonate. Sometimes you have to pick your battles. And I think that quote always gives me, it serves as a compass as to how I'm going to enter into these conversations, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And another quote that I love from her is when sometimes when you're in this conversation and somebody's saying, oh, but you know, I didn't mean to, it was just a joke. And they're, again, it's the intent. But they're not looking at the impact. She says, if they continue to assert that they, quote, didn't mean it like that, remind them that you appreciate their willingness to clarify their intent and hope they appreciate your willingness to clarify their impact. I just love
it. Love it.
Oh, it's
So let me repeat. Let protecting your joy be the biggest act of resistance.
yeah.
Amen. Yes. Yes.
Let protecting your joy be your greatest and most persistent act of resistance.
Yes.
That's always my compass in entering these conversations. I always find that helps me decide.
Yeah, that needs to be a t-shirt. Tiana?
Yeah. I think that quote needs to be dropped into the chat, and Donna needs to put that out with the next newsletter. 100%. I love that. And I'm going to stick by that because for me right now, a lot of the focus is on happiness and joy and what matters in life. And it's so I go into work and I give 100%. I just stop giving 120, 130 because I give that 120 and 130 to my family because that's what brings me joy. So I love that quote and I can't wait to use it. Sarah, can I just say one more
Yeah.
thing too about with the question on conflict that needs to be productive, that question that I also wanted to add in that I created in my team, because all of OLG is rather broad, so I can't speak for the entire organization, but within my team, it's called, we can have healthy conflict, because healthy conflict will sometimes bring us to a better solution. So I have this healthy conflict aspect that I go in, but it is, to Monty's point, the trust and psychological safety is there. So when you have trust in your team and you have that psychological safety, then you can have good, healthy, constructive conflict, because that's what will help you be a little bit more agile and solution oriented in your workspace. And I could say that for work. I haven't done the healthy conflict thing in the relationships at home yet. I'll let you know how that goes.
Right. So, Jenny, how do you know that a difficult conversation has gone well? How do you gauge that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, again, it depends on what type of conversation, the context, the events leading up to it. So, you know, the ideal situation, again, depending on context and what issue we're talking about, is there is mutual respect and understanding at the end of it. Like, to me, that's you know, your ideal place, that there's been no disrespect, you know, no loss of respect that's come out of it. The relationship is still maintained. That's a key part of it. And so, but not all of us will agree when we have these types of conversations. So, you know, another successful outcome might be that both parties have just agreed to disagree. So what that means is there is at least an acknowledgement and a respect for the other's person's perspective, which, you know, doesn't sort of, you know, sour the ongoing, let's say if it's the workplace, you know, you don't get a souring of the ongoing relationship. That's really key. I think so. So I guess in a nutshell, what I would say is the outcome ultimately that you want, regardless of whether it's at work or in your personal life or anywhere else, is that there is a relationship at the end of it, whether you agreed to disagree, whether you came to a mutual understanding and you're both on the same page. But what is the nature? What is the state of the relationship at the end of that conversation? And the state of that relationship at the end of the conversation, because it's like an equation, it's all about how you went into it in the first place, which of course we have discussed throughout this conversation thread about steps you can take and all of that good stuff. So how you go into it has a huge impact on the outcome at the end.
Monte?
Yeah, I agree with Jenny. I think because it's the nature of a conversation can be so broad, right? And we haven't really pinpointed what type of conversation. I think in situations, I'll give an example where somebody has reported to a senior leader in an organization an incident of sexual harassment, right? And you know, you have the courage to go and report this and have this conversation with the senior leader who you know is responsible for these types of complaints. And at the end of the conversation, if the outcome is, well, we agree to disagree on the facts or the complaint itself, then it's no matter the relationship or the power dynamics or anything that can result from that, it's not a productive. There's no sense of accountability. So I really think it varies on the nature of the conversation and the issues at hand. But I think a big part in terms of outcome is accountability. And in the context of DEI, I really think it's when we're having these conversations with and among senior leaders, and there's a call to action to address systemic inequality within an organization, the outcome should be one that holds the leader accountable to work for change, to advance the change that's necessary to create that culture of inclusion where everyone is treated equitably. That, I think, would be the outcome.
Great, thanks for that. Tianda?
I don't know what else to add to those beautiful remarks. Like that, I agree. Like that's a mic drop, but that's exactly it. You need to be able to understand what your role is and the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And then, as Monte had just said, when in terms of EDI, it's such an emotional thing for so many of us, right? So many people leading EDI right now are Black women. So many of us are losing our jobs because companies aren't prioritizing EDI. And so, you know, what are you accountable for as an organization? What do you hold yourself? What's your brand? What do you need to do? So anyways, I'll ramble on forever, but I don't have anything further than what Jenny and Monte added. It was exceptional.
So I think Monte was the one who brought up social media. Can we talk about difficult conversations that are not face-to-face conversations? Because I'm assuming all along we've been talking about the face-to-face ones. For example, you know, some of us, our families are in Africa, several thousand miles away, and something happens and we just need to have these difficult conversations. Is there some sort of protocol to use to sort of navigate that successfully as opposed to the in-person version of those conversations? Anybody?
I would say never have a courageous conversation on social. I think it's going to go, especially publicly. And then if we're talking about social media, I'm talking about, you know, LinkedIn and X and Instagram or Facebook or those social media platforms. And I really believe in those situations when people say something on social media, and I say this very much aware that I'm a Black woman, and I see how Black women are attacked on social media and vilified and discredited. I'm also aware of when people who are trying to do good are vilified and discredited and canceled, and that doesn't give them an opportunity to learn from what they've said and the harm that they've inflicted. So we need to give people grace, but we also need to hold them accountable. And so it's not an easy, it's not binary that we're working in the gray. And if you're talking about, you know, communicating on text messages, I think I would always try to avoid it and try to have the conversation in person or over the phone. But I find emojis really helpful in terms of minimizing how you say something. Because sometimes I'll write something and then I'll look back at what I've just wrote, and it may objectively, I think, oh, that might have landed a little harshly, or it may have been not come across the way. And so if I use an emoji, it kind of, I don't know, I find that it helps even out the tone, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Tianda?
I think that makes a lot of sense. So I look at it in two ways. So I'm not on social media anymore just because I just can't do it. I'm on LinkedIn, yes, and even then I'm barely. So social, I'm not an expert by any ways, but I think whether you're in person, like it's kind of like that person, that over achiever, that conversation who's, you know, the person who takes a conversation to another level and calls out in the open, you're calling somebody out in public. It's the same thing on social media, unless you're direct messaging someone, but it's everyone seeing your comment. And I think, you know, people just get a little brave on social media. So it's not a place to have a difficult conversation at all. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm completely off social media. I protect my joy, resistance. Anyway, so that's the first thing I would say. But then using the tools like WhatsApp or Facebook to message your family, and because that's the best way to keep in touch. Sometimes you do have to bring up a difficult conversation, I think, every now and again. And I 100% agree with Monte. Like, I try to use a lot of smiley faces to let people know I'm not angry, or I'm not, but this is I'm not going to, it's not going to become an argument, but I would like to have this conversation with you. My husband, for some reason, God bless him, seems to like to talk to me on text while we're in the same house. And I get very irritated by that, because I'm like, dude, walk up the stairs. And his texts are very like, ugh. And I'm like, what, are you mad? Like, what's happening? You know, and I don't know if that's a safety for him. Maybe it's easier for him to converse via text because it doesn't come across that harsh, but I still accept it as harsh because there's no emoji on there. He never puts a smiley face or anything. So I actually don't know. So I look at it in two different ways. If you're attacking me on social media, I won't even respond. Like I said, you get too brave. But if it's a personal conversation with your parents, with your family, because it's just easier to talk via WhatsApp, I think you can have it. You should be careful about your tone, what it looks like, because the written word is a lot more ingrained in your brain than the face-to-face, where you can actually see the body language and see the smile or the hurt, and you can actually feed off. So I would do encourage to have a difficult conversation with a family member face-to-face via a WhatsApp or a text or a Facebook. But if it is your only modality, that I suggest, again, coming from a place of kindness with a little bit of courage, because if you have to say something, I think knowing that it comes from a place of kindness, I think it will land in a place of kindness. And that's my addition to that topic.
Thanks for that. And if you don't like using emojis, just turn on your video so
Yeah.
they can actually read the emotion on your
Yeah.
face.
Or leave a voice
Jenny.
note.
Yes. Yeah. I tend to prefer that. Yeah. So they can actually hear the emotion in the voice. And yeah. Jenny?
Yeah, so for me, I think I have an inbuilt personal policy that's very similar to everything that's been said. I do not use social media at all for difficult conversations. And the main platform that I'm on, which is LinkedIn, I have accounts elsewhere, but I'd say the bulk of my time is on LinkedIn. I actually use it for the opposite. I use it to amplify people. I use it to share information. I use it to garner support. So, to be honest, a ton of conversations, but total, in a totally, opposite way. Um, Similar to what has been said, in my view, it absolutely is not the place to have difficult conversations. And a lot of people, I believe, overshare on some of those platforms, quite frankly. And again, depending on um, how you are raised, your cultural background. Again, these are all things that make us up as human beings, and therefore make us behave in certain ways or have certain views about how we navigate through life. And so when I think of some of that, it wouldn't be natural for me to um, confront somebody on social media or call them out. Now, if there is a thought leadership thread that is happening on a subject that I know something about, I may put my opinion, but in a very professional, data researched based way. So it's not really calling out the other person because what they said was wrong or I didn't agree with it, but to say, thanks for sharing. By the way, did you know X, Y, and Z? And more than likely put a link to my source. So that's really the most that I would do. Definitely, in my view, similar to what's already been said, I don't believe it's the place for a courageous, brave, or difficult conversation.
Totally agree. So don't be like breaking up with people by text or, on Facebook or Instagram or none of that. That's just no, that's not on. So somebody brings up the topic of difficult conversations that have led to loss of trust and relationships that need to continue in spite of that. So how do you go about rebuilding the trust? How do you go about the conversation to rebuild the trust that was lost after the difficult conversation?
So
Man.
if I may go ahead, Tiana.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
Jenny, you go.
Yes. So first of all, the thought that comes to my mind with that question, Sarah, is how the trust got broken with that difficult conversation. As soon as you said that, that's the first thing that suddenly popped into my head. And, from just my own personal experience, and this is more outside of work, there's certain difficult conversations that I have actually intentionally decided not to engage in because I'm not confident that that conversation will stay private. So when you look at, if you do research in the area of courageous conversations and difficult conversations, one of the key principles is, depending on the nature and the context, is to keep what is said private. Like the instances, a public calling out, you then find a time to speak one-to-one, to keep what is said private. If nothing else, just out of human decency and respect, quite frankly. So I can say for myself, the instances where I have not decided to proceed with that difficult conversations because I'm not confident that that my views or perspectives will stay confidential and not be shared. And again, because we're all different as human beings, you know what it's like. If you have said something one way and it gets repeated, it will not be the version that you said because the other person is a different person. So how it will come across when they repeat it may not be as you intended. So there's risk there. Again, it's back to that risk assessment. So now going back to now looping it into what you're saying about how you restore that trust. Yeah, I mean, that is big because it depends again who it is, what the nature of the relationship is, all of those things that we've talked about. And depending on those factors, it may require a different approach, each time. Trust is one of those things so difficult to get back. I mean, you spend money, the money's gone forever because you spent it. I see trust in that same way a little bit. It takes 1 minute to break it, but it could take a whole lifetime to get it back, depending on who it is. So I don't have a hard and fast answer. I'm just really giving you some perspective on it.
No, thanks for that. That's a good perspective. Tianda?
Yeah, listen, there are times when trust is broken, depending on the individual context, everything else. It's either you make a decision that that relationship isn't worth it to mend, or it is. And that's very individual. It's very much up to the person who has felt the mistrust. It's up to them to make that call, and it is very hard. There is no hard and fast answer. I would never say to somebody, when you're trust broken, oh, it's okay, just work on it, because you don't understand that personal harm. And so I 100% think that that situation definitely needs to be evaluated, and you have to come to a decision whether it's worth it to build, that you feel that you can build that trust back up. And then if you do, then you work on it. And obviously therapy is big, especially if it's a personal relationship, that you really have to get all the help. But yes, it's very, very hard to rebuild trust when that trust is lost and something is always missing. I find even when you go back, there's always something missing. Mm-hmm. Very, very good question.
Yeah, there's a loss of innocence there in the dynamic. Monte?
I would say it really depends, again, from an organizational perspective. Sometimes people may not even be aware that there's been a breaking of trust, because they're not even aware of how they've caused harm. So it's in those situations, it's the target, the person who's been negatively impacted, who now is in this distrusting state and doesn't feel safe within their organization. I don't know how they build up that trust within an organization where they don't feel safe. So this is where I always say, in having conversations about challenging and having difficult conversations, it has to be part of a wider organizational commitment to advancing DEI. You can't just say, of course, we're going to talk about race and racism and ableism and homophobia in our organization, but not have structures in place to address these issues. So it's not just, yes, we have conversations. It's about having other mechanisms, structures, policies, and programs in place to ensure that everything kind of works harmoniously to establish trust and psychological safety, so that when we have these conversations, we can, in the event that harm has taken place, we can start to rebuild that trust. Because in large part, many people who are aware of these issues, are race conscious, for instance, will know that if I've done something harmful, I can take the steps to rebuild and engage in some restorative practices.
And I could say,
Thank-
Sarah, can I also jump in real quick too, to say, just because when Monte was talking, it triggered something at work as well, is that the foundations of trust is honesty and transparency. And organizations need to have more transparency and honesty within their culture to rebuild trust in that sort of working relationship. So I just wanted to throw that in because it came into my head when Monte was talking. Sorry to
No,
interrupt.
very good point. Excellent point. So as we wind down, I'd just like to get some closing thoughts from all of you about difficult conversations.
Who do you want to start?
Who wants to start?
I'll start because I don't like going after these brilliant women.
Okay.
They'll probably leave some mic drops, and I want people to think of them after me. So I do want to say, though, difficult conversations are going to happen in life, especially when you care. We're human beings, and so we care and we connect, and so conflict comes up. And so you have to have a different conversation. I would say, please know yourself. Really do some reflection and get to know who you are as a human being, because if you do that, then you'll know how you're going to react to situations. So I would say be self-aware, then give yourself grace and space that you're going to make mistakes. Human beings are not perfect. We leave perfection up to the gods. We as human beings can't get to that level of perfection. And so to give yourself grace and space, and do not put that expectation on other people as well, because perfection is just not something you'd get to. So self-awareness, self-care, and grace and space, very important.
Amen. Jenny?
Thank you for that, Tionda. That was amazing. Yeah, I would say, you know, trust your value system, trust your belief system, trust in yourself. If something doesn't sit right, it doesn't sit right for a reason. So don't invalidate those feelings. Focus on the issue, not the person. And never feel pressured to react in the moment, no matter how provoked you may be, because research shows that's the I forget which part, the part of the brain that is not, the rational part is the piece that gives that first reaction in the moment, which is why it may not be your best reaction. So never feel that it's a sign of weakness to not react in the moment. Let it percolate, gather your thoughts, and then come back when your emotions are steady, everything's under control, you're putting your best foot forward, particularly in the workplace. You always want to be showing the best, your best self, and showing that you're putting your best foot forward, which won't happen if you allow yourself to be provoked in the moment.
And thank you to the person who says it's the amygdala.
That's it. Thank you very much. That's
thank you very much.
I didn't want to mispronounce it. I knew it was something like that. So thank you, whoever said that. Yes, it absolutely is.
Thanks for that, Jenny. And last but not least, Monte. Closing thoughts.
It's so hard to follow that. These are all, I agree with everything. I think for me, the big ones distinguish between intent and impact. So I may mean something innocent and I may be joking, but understand it's the impact of our words and our actions in these conversations. It's not about our character. So that can help us, avoid that and mitigate that defensiveness, but it's about what you're saying or doing in any given moment. And then those values, again, of empathy, compassion, curiosity, and humility. And I'll say it again, protect your joy. That can be your compass in terms of, do I have the bandwidth to enter and to sustain this conversation? If not, you're good, right? And again, having a community agreement can be really helpful in terms of guiding and engaging and sustaining, more importantly, these conversations within an organization. But it's not just enough for us to be able to talk about challenging and difficult issues within an organization. We have to have other mechanisms and structures and systems in place to really cultivate organizational diversity, equality, and inclusion.
That is the perfect point on which to end. Yeah, many mic drops, Tionda, not just Monte's, yours, Jenny's, Monte Malepo, Jenny Okonkwo, Tyonda, Kerr, thank you so much. This was not a difficult conversation. This was a very easy conversation with lots of great advice and pearls of wisdom. And thank you very much to the audience that tuned in and the people who asked those fabulous questions.
And thank you to you, Sarah. You're such an incredible moderator, always.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was amazing. And thank you, Mante and Tionda. I really enjoyed being part of this panel. Thank you so much. I feel I've learned so much as well from all of you.
Me as
Thank
well.
you.
Great way to spend a Sunday afternoon. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Love being
Thank
around
you very
powerful Black
much.
women.
Yes, amen.
Thank you.